off of this call, it means that my Wi-Fi has dropped off, and know that I'll just rejoin on my phone hotspot. That's my disclaimer because, net is a little touch and go. So if I drop off, I'll come right back. So we're going to have a lot of different time for question and answer in this segment. I'm going to go over the basics of food fermentation, the basic guidelines you can follow, because none of these things are real recipes as such. They really are guidelines for you then to experiment and get creative with. We are going to also ferment vegetables together in the 2 different styles. We'll also talk about a ginger bug and how you can then make a soda using a ginger bug. And then I can answer lots of fermentation questions. However, we won't go too deep down, it's such a rabbit hole. So we'll stick mostly to fermenting vegetables and then whatever you guys are also curious about learning. And we'll also talk about the why, which is the truth about our microbiome, how bacteria are our ancestors, how we're kind of committing an all-out war on bacteria in our modern lives, and how this is the best way to invite those bacteria back into our life. So that sound good for everyone? We'll get going. I'm just gonna close this door a little bit better so we don't get disturbed. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna start first with the why. Or sorry, Jacob, do you want me to start with some questions right now? Taking questions?
We don't have any questions at the moment, so just
okay. So just get right to it. So yeah, first we'll start with the why. Why do we ferment foods? What is the history of fermenting foods, and why is it important for us? We'll start by saying that bacteria, including bacteria and yeast and protozoa and amoeba, all these prokaryotic beings, are truly our oldest ancestors. They were the primordial soup that existed before more complex, if you will, species started evolving. Now, these are all prokaryotic beings, which means their genetic information can be exchanged completely fluidly. We are eukaryotic beings, so I cannot exchange my genetic information with a carrot, nor can I with a potato or a tomato, right? But yeast and bacteria, they can exchange genetic information freely, which is of course why we see that the COVID-19 virus keeps changing and mutating, because that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what they're meant to do. When, as evolution was continuing, these very intelligent, highly intelligent prokaryotic beings actually figured out how to make host inside of our bodies, how they could live off of us, right? So in our body, in any single human body, there's about 2 to 4 kilos of your physical weight that is just bacteria and yeast, not your own DNA. There are trillions of different yeasts and bacteria that live inside of mostly our gut, but also on our skin, also in women's vaginas. When babies are born, we pass through the birth canal getting coated in lactic acid bacteria that protects the new baby. And that lactic acid bacteria is the protective layer on a new baby to then be out in the world where you have, all of these different viruses and yeast and bacteria floating in the air. So this yeast and bacteria, our microbiome is what we're going to call it from now on. Microbiome is the official term. That's something that you can go on to research further. So our microbiome is referring to this trillion of different yeast and bacteria that live inside of our gut. They are essential for us, and they have been part of our lives, all of evolution, for hundreds of thousands of years. There is no us without them. And they do very essential things inside of our bodies. So bacteria not only synthesize key vitamins, especially things like vitamin B and vitamin K, and they also help break down our food and make sure that our digestion is efficient. But they also, in your gut is where 90% of our immune cells are produced, and about 85% of our serotonin is produced. So our serotonin is the hormone that makes us feel happy and well. And of course, our immune cells are the things that truly protect us from everything in the outside world. So all of those things are formed in our gut by our microbiome. in our modern world, where not only, well, yeah, in our modern world, right? Here is how we destroy that bacteria. Our ancestors, before I get to our modern world, our ancestors would have fermented a great many things because they didn't have refrigerators. Now we can store food in the fridge. But otherwise, if you get a whole glut of cabbages out of the field and you can't eat them fast enough, I mean, a cabbage will only stay good on your counter for a couple days, maybe up to a week. But how do you extend that harvest? You extend that harvest through fermentation. Now, beyond just fermentation, our ancestors also had the knowledge that fermentation brings out more nutrition in things. A lot of the plants, I might just have, we'll go through and mute everyone. There we go, mute that person. So yes, fermentation brings out extra nutrients from our food. That is important because, a lot of plants, the goal of the plant is not necessarily to nourish us. That's a nice thought. Really, the goal of the plant is to go undetected through our body, come out the other end as an intact seed, plant itself in the ground and grow again. So a lot of different plants, including grains, have anti-nutrients, nutrient blockers, because again, their goal is not to nourish us. Their goal is to continue growing. So fermentation is the way to break down all of these nutrient blockers. So the nutrients in food are actually bioavailable for our bodies to uptake. These are why bacteria are so essential for us. Now, in our modern world, we use lots of disinfecting cleaners. We use lots of hand sanitizers, especially in the last 2 years. But we also eat a lot more packaged food. Once any food that comes out of a package has been sterilized to a large extent. That's why it can sit on the shelf for 6 months or 1 year or 2 years or 20 years, and we can still consume it. That's because we've killed off all of the native yeast and bacteria that was in that food, meaning that as we eat more and more packaged foods, which is a very unfortunate trend that India is following the West on, then we're starting to eat more and more sterile foods. So in that way, we're not consuming any living bacteria that's on our food, nor are we really fermenting foods as much as we used to because we have the convenience of a refrigerator. And in addition, we are sanitizing and wiping out bacteria all over the place with Clorox and with Lysol and with Dettol and all these things that say they kill 99% of germs. Well, they kill 99% of everything. And when we kill all of the beneficial bacteria, we leave this ecological void empty, this ecological niche empty. And then we allow pathogenic bacteria to fill that much easier than if we had this protective, layer, you can think of it as, of all this beneficial bacteria that we have co-evolved with. That as well is that we take lots of antibiotics. Antibiotics are overprescribed to the next level. And antibiotics are very strong, which means even after taking a single round of antibiotics, your gut microbiome, your gut flora, this bacteria that are living in there, you will not have the same composition of gut flora for up to 2 years after taking one single dose, meaning one single round of antibiotics. That's to show the potency of that. And many folks might take antibiotics multiple times every year. So we're starting to have a lot more research on not only when we break down our microbiome, not only the effects that has on our digestion, and I'll get into a little bit of that in a second, but also the effects that has on our overall well-being and especially on our mental health. There is a strong comorbidity between people with IBS and then people with depression. IBS being irritable bowel syndrome, where your guts are off, right? You have a dysbiosis in your gut. There is a very strong correlation between gut dysbiosis and depression. Not only depression, also anxiety and these real mental plagues. Now, that connection goes back all of history. We even think of the word melancholia, to be melanchile or melancholia, it's to be sad. That goes all the way back to the Greek root of mela kala, which is black bile, meaning an upset stomach, a dysbiosis of the gut. So we really have, even in our language for all of history, this anecdotal connection between our gut and our brain. That's why when we have a gut feeling, it's something that we really know, or when our gut is off, our whole mood is off. But now we're starting to get these true scientific links between what happens when we have a dysbiosis in our gut, which comes from eating sterile foods, no longer fermenting foods, taking antibiotics, or even consuming animal products that have been fed antibiotics. So that's all the, all mainstream dairy, all mainstream eggs, all mainstream meat completely. They're fed antibiotics as part of their feed. So now we have these real scientific connections between what's happening in our brain, anxiety and depression, and how that's linked to our gut. This is my last little scientific fact before we actually get into fermenting. But these bacteria, they also they fill up the cell wall that separates our gut from the rest of our body. In your body, that's called your epithelial layer. That is literally the lining of your gut that separates whatever is being digested from your bloodstream, from the rest of your body. When we have allergenic responses in the form of inflammation, which might even take many forms, that might take the form of joint pain or of swelling or of headaches. These things are often not attributed to our gut, but almost always go right back to that being the center point. Because when we don't have this rich, diverse bacteria that's living in our gut, you can think of our epithelial layer, that lining, as just dry stones or dry bricks with no mortar, right? So if you stacked up a house with no mortar between your bricks, rain would get through, bugs would go in and out, right? It's permeable. The exact same thing happens to our epithelial layer in our gut. When we have chronic inflammation that happens from inefficient digestion or eating all of our modern foods that are not necessarily so good for us, causes these very small micro perforations in that layer. Now, this layer, that epithelial layer, is as thick as one cell. That's very, very thin. So we are one cell wall that separates our gut from everything else in our body. When there are perforations in that, that's when food particles escape out into our bloodstream and we get a truly allergenic response in response to normal food that we're eating that should stay intact in one place inside of our gut. So when we eat good beneficial bacteria, you can think of them as mortar or putty between the walls of our epithelial layer. So that's why it's also so important, because it protects the rest of our body from the things that we're eating, because really the things we're eating are not meant to mix with our bloodstream. So just even at that scientific now moment of wrap up, before we actually get into the practicality of doing this, I would love to see if you guys have any questions at this point, because knowing that why is actually such a critical part about why to do this at all. So if anyone does, please unmute yourself or put it in the chat and I'll answer that.
We have a question from Rajib Acharya. Rajib, you're welcome to put on your mic and ask the question directly, or I can read it out for you. Rajib, I'm gonna wait a second for you. Is
the one that does the conversion of carbohydrates or the process of fermentation and rich flavor?
Yes, that is it. Absolutely.
Yes, I will answer that question. Yes, absolutely, it does. So I'm assuming you guys have all heard the term umami. You know, we talk about the different tastes. There's bitter, there's sweet, there's salty, etc. There's sour, and there's umami. What umami speaks to, because nearly all foods that are umami are fermented foods. So maybe like that's miso or that's soy sauce. Umami foods, our body, it reacts to the taste that happens in that transformation, in that fermentation with bacteria interacting. And that is what gives us this flavor that we are so drawn to, that we call umami, because that is truly your body's recognition of a good, healthy, delicious thing. So yes, fermentation changes flavor very much. You will eat a sourdough bread as compared to a yeasted white bread, and the flavor will be vastly different. It makes more complex flavors, more layered flavors, And often there's almost always an element with fermentation of a sour flavor. That's because of the presence of lactic acid bacteria, which is one of the most protective and beneficial bacteria that is partner with us. It's quite literally you as a human baby, anyone who passed through a birth canal, your first exposure to the outside world is a coating of lactic acid bacteria. So that's why often you get that sour flavor. So Artia said, should pregnant people consume fermented foods? And this is a really great question, because I will say it like this: everyone should consume fermented foods. All of our ancestors did consume fermented foods. It was a necessary and staple part of any of our ancestors' diets. Now, as many of us in the modern world are out of practice of eating fermented foods, you should go into them gradually, because they do introduce new bacteria into your body. And so you wouldn't want to be eating no fermented food at all today, and then tomorrow start having dahi and kombucha and sauerkraut and pickles and dosa all in one day, because that's going to be too much bacteria for your body to handle. You want to start, if you're not eating any fermented foods, just introduce them slowly, maybe have, a little bit every day, and allow your body to adjust, because it does aid efficient digestion, but too efficient of digestion is never a good thing, right? We don't want to digest too fast. That's quite uncomfortable. So we want to just take in fermented foods slowly if we haven't been doing that at all before. This is a great question. So someone has just sent this to me directly, which is that, doesn't fermenting foods make one get an acidic reaction, and isn't fermented food excessively salty? This is a super important question, and it's one that, having lived in several other countries before India, I've never heard this connection. And yet in India, I hear a consistent connection between don't eat fermented foods because they raise acidity. And what I wonder is if there's more of a long tradition of fermented foods being here, like achars, which are very salty and can create acidity, because they're also very oily, and they're also generally full of masala. So I would say on the whole that no, fermented foods do not increase acidity in your body. And actually, when you're eating different organic acids that are present in a fermented food, they have an alkalizing effect inside of the body. So I would say that the world doesn't have that connection, but it's one I consistently hear in India. So try for yourself. But in my personal opinion, it does not create an acidic reaction. And is fermented food excessively salty? That answer is an absolute no. Achar is salty, and if we're thinking about fermented foods as achar, then yes, that's a salty food. But fermented foods is such a range, right? For example, this kombucha that's right in front of me, this has no salt in it. If I were to, instead of making a pancake or a crepe in the morning by putting flour and baking soda and baking powder together, if I was instead to let my flour sit on yogurt overnight and naturally start fermenting and get bubbly, that's also not a salty food. So the world of fermentation is so vast beyond just a salty pickle. And we'll look at some pickles today, and we'll also talk about how you can decrease that salt very, very low, or how you can raise it up, and why salt is essential as a part of vegetable ferments. Okay, let's see. Shilpa asks how to know if it's good or if it's over fermented. I'll address that question when I get a little bit further in. Are there any bad fermented foods? If yes, then why? I would say on the whole, no. Are there any bad foods? Yes, packaged foods. But is the rest of what Mother Nature makes bad? Not at all. And are these processes bad? Not at all. So a ferment can go bad, but I don't think there's any unhealthy fermented food that you should avoid. And Anshul's question about kombucha, I think I'll just shelf this, or maybe Didi, you can help me with that. Just shelf that one to the end, and we'll see if we have time for that one, so as to not break the flow necessarily. Okay, cool. So last question from Shilpa, and then we're gonna move it on. Last question is apple cider a good form of a ferment? Yes, all natural vinegar is an amazing form of a fermented food. And in fact, so behind me, we have lots of kombucha brewing. We run a company called Rise Up Kombucha. And that kombucha, when a kombucha is in its final stage, becomes vinegar. Similarly, in the way that apple juice, if left to spontaneously ferment, eventually becomes vinegar. Vinegar means that all of the sugar has been eaten, and so you're left with just something acidic. And natural vinegars can be made out of many different fruits, even things like kombucha. And that is a wonderful ferment because you can use it to clean your house, you can use it to shampoo and condition your hair, or you can use it to eat, of course. Or you can even drink it as an alkalizing tonic in your body. All right, so we're gonna now move on to actually fermenting. And before we do that, we have to talk about some basics of fermentation, which is that you really don't need to worry about, oh, and I'll start by saying, you guys are all gonna get a PDF attached to this. So don't feel stressed and overwhelmed about amounts and ratios and all of that. You'll get a PDF that will basically go over everything I've just said, so you can kick yourself off that way. So we want to know with fermentation, unlike jamming or preserving something like a passata or a jam, we don't need to worry about sterility. We don't need to sterilize our jars or sterilize our equipment because we're actually creating a bacteria-rich environment. We're trying to foster certain bacteria in there. Those certain bacteria, namely lactic acid bacteria, are protective, meaning they're going to keep away other putrefying bacteria from coming to the party. So we don't need to worry about sterility. Just make sure things are washed and cleaned, and that's it. When we ferment, especially vegetables, which is what we're doing today, we want to ferment them in glass or in ceramic. So I'm sure there's an old achar burnie sitting somewhere in your home or your family's home. You can use that, or you can use glass. You can't ferment in metal, it'll corrode. And you can't ferment in plastic because you're gonna leach all these toxins from your plastic and you're trying to make a health food. So that's an oxymoron. So glass or ceramic, always. Now in vegetable ferments, and also there are no specific recipes, right? I mean, every culture around the world has 1,001 different ways to ferment 1,001 different vegetables. So you can be as experimental as you want. I've fermented super wacky things. Sometimes they turn out great and sometimes they're awful. That's just part of the experiment. So just start on the wild, wacky ride and experiment with quite a lot of things. We're gonna cover the two basic strategies, the two basic techniques to ferment vegetables. And knowing those two techniques will really allow you to ferment anything because you'll know whether it should be a dry salt method or a brine method. And we're gonna do both. And now let's talk about the critical role of salt. And as we're doing that, I'm just gonna keep slowly chopping things. So the critical role of salt is that salt keeps away putrefying bacteria while it allows lactic acid bacteria to come to the party. Lactic acid bacteria is not bothered by salt, so it will continue to multiply its colonies and eventually crowd out so much that ecological niche of your ferment that other putrefying bacteria will not be able to come in. The other role that salt does is that it maintains the pectin in the cell wall of the vegetable. If you don't, you can ferment without salt. It's just that the likeliness of getting mold is higher. And also the ferment itself will be a lot mushier because there will be nothing to help protect and keep the rigidity of the cell wall of the vegetable. So all vegetable ferments have salt. The caveat is that you can ferment without salt. It's just, I'm not going to teach that way because it's difficult. It's more difficult. But you can, if you have a salt sensitive diet, you can just reduce that salt way, way, way down. You don't need to use the full amount of salt, but having a bit of it really helps overall. So there are two methods to ferment vegetables. I'm going to put them in the chat so you guys are all really clear on what I'm saying. So one is dry salting method. And that is 2% weight of vegetable. Now I'll get to that. Don't be confused by it yet. And the other is brine method. And that is 2 to 5% weight of water. We will start with the brine method because it's very easy. So a brine A brine is a simple term for salt water. It means water plus salt. That's it. So we would use the brine method, and let's take a look at this. We would use the brine method for something like, whoa, do you see all this crazy fizz coming up? Cool.
Yeah, it's bubbling.
Yeah, it's alive. Now, we would use the brine method for something hardy like this. This is a carrot round. You can imagine that, the brine method is essentially we're pouring the salt over the ferment, the salt water. Dry salting method, just to give the comparison so I can teach it better, dry salting is when you're massaging the vegetable with salt so that the vegetable extracts the water itself. Now, that makes a lot of sense. In the example of a carrot, if I want this in carrot rounds, or check this out, or in carrot sticks, woo, yoo-hoo. I haven't opened these for a couple of days. Or if I wanted it in a carrot stick like this. Now, these are hardy and chunky. You can imagine that if I just put some salt on those and massage them, I wouldn't extract liquid, right? So then I want to use a brine method. Brine is the correct method for things like cucumber slices, any whole vegetable, of course. Things like chilies, you can ferment chilies and then later make a hot sauce with that. So if you wanted to ferment whole chilies or whole peppers or even whole okra, bindi, long bindi fermented with garlic in a brine is super delicious. Same with then, carrot sticks or zucchini sticks or beetroot slices or chunks of gobi, anything that's hard and chunky. Or in the example of bindi or okra, something that if you tried to extract that liquid, it would just be like a slimy, gooey mess, right? So anything can fit into a brine method. Not anything can fit into a dry salting method. So I can brine literally any vegetable and it will ferment. This is as easy as cutting up these vegetables, putting them in a jar, pouring the brine over, and then weighing it down. So what I mean by that is that I'll usually take the end of a vegetable. You can get fancy weights, but that's unnecessary. And then you would weigh, this is what you're using to actually keep the ferment under the liquid. If you can see here, the liquid is all the way up to the top. And then of course I have a little lid over that holds that in place. If I don't have the liquid all the way to the top, and this is something in fermentation that we call the liquid seal. There you go, liquid seal. The liquid seal is absolutely essential. Without that, I'm going to have air interacting with my vegetable, and every single time, that's how I'm going to get mold. So that is why I must ensure that liquid seal. So you must take something that can sink your vegetables underneath the liquid. You could use a clean stone, like a round river stone. You could use a glass kind of a coaster or something like that. You could use anything that is not, you don't want to use plastic or metal, again, really anywhere in your ferments. I find it's very easy and convenient to use the chunky ends of vegetables. So we'll ferment this cabbage together. I could just cut this bit off. That's my chunky bit, keep it all sunken down. And I don't need to worry about getting any kind of a fancy weight. Now, this is fermented in a small jar, but you can use up to very large jars, anything like this, even larger burnies to ferment. So now we're going to actually make one of these styles, a brine style ferment together. And you can see how that looks. We're going to do it with this fennel from the garden. Why? Is because it's starting to go to seed. And so it's not going to be super awesome, just raw anymore. It's going to be a little fibrous inside. So this is where instead of wasting this beautiful, beautiful vegetable, we're now going to turn it into an awesome pickle. So let's do that. I'm going to turn my camera down here. But while I'm doing this, you are free to unmute your mic and actually ask me a question, since we'll actually be kind of in motion.
I had a question, Laura. Yeah. Is there a contamination risk by touching the brine with your finger?
If your hands are clean, no, there is not.
Right.
If your hand is dirty, then yes, there is. But that's, again, going back to that like cleanliness versus sterility, which is that if my hand is clean, it's really not something I need to worry about. And I don't need to be panicked about things being sterile.
Just a follow-up question on that. What do you use as hand wash soap? Do you use a Dettol?
You know, mostly I use Castile soap to wash all of my dishes and things. Oh yeah, this is an overdone vegetable from the garden. So mostly I wash, for vegetables, I just use Rita and Shikakai for washing Barton and things like that. But for my hands, mostly I use Castile soap, which you can make yourself. So now I have all of these nice, beautiful fennel bits. This is also what I'm talking about as a chunky, hardy bit that can sink it all down.
We had a question about that from Purvi. Purvi, you're welcome to put on your mic and ask yourself.
Hi, Laura.
Hello.
So my question is that because of that chunky top, won't the ferment still catch mold because it's still outside? Like a part of it is still outside the ferment and a part of it is inside?
That's such a good question. And sometimes that chunky bit does catch mold, but you can just throw that out. You know, we're never, that the goal of this bit is never to eat, it's just to keep things sunken down. So then you can just toss that at the end. You know, if you get a little, because also the time on a brine ferment like this is so short, it's only 4 days. So, you know, usually mold is more of an issue for something like a sauerkraut that is going to ferment for 2 or 3 weeks, as opposed to a couple of days. So even if my little carrot top here, which you can see that in fact it has not caught mold, but even if it had, then I could just simply toss this out and the bottom's going to be okay.
Oh, okay. That's all right. Thank you so much. This helps a lot.
Great. All right, so I'll give these a little wash. I have a bowl of water here.
Meantime, Didi, is there a question that we have stacked while Laura is washing the veggies? Rajib, you're welcome to put on your mic and ask yourself. Anchal has been addressed. Rajib. Yeah, okay, I will ask Rajib's question on his behalf if he's not unmuting. Does the conversion and conserving sustain bacterial alliance and growth?
Do conversion and conserving sustain bacteria alliance and growth? I'm not totally clear on your question. Maybe you could rephrase and ask again. So now what I'm doing, I'll just mention, is I am just cutting these into little slices and I'm going to put them in my jar. I could also just ferment it whole like this. I could chop it very small. How you chop it does not matter. It does not matter at all. So it's totally chopper's choice. And you'll see that all I did was just rinse the vegetable so it's clean, and I'm putting it straight in my jar. And this is going to be an awesome fermented fennel. I could add to this any kind of masala that I want, meaning I could toast some jeera or toast some ajwain, or add, if I wanted to, even things like cinnamon. You know, I can add any spice at this point. It's also really nice to add garlic. That gives an amazing flavor. Or if you're a family that likes things spicy, you can add chilies. To today's, I also have some mint from the garden, so we're going to add that. Now, there was a really good question on here, which is that Pooja asked, which is, what is the shelf life of fermentation after it's refrigerated? So this is the amazing part about fermentation, which is that you have now increased the shelf life of this carrot, which might have been 2 weeks, to now 1-2 years. You can find a fermented vegetable in your fridge that is years old and it will still be totally edible. So yeah, they last a very, very long time. So the shelf life, once it's in the fridge, is several years.
Is fermenting restricted only to non-sweet vegetables or fruits? Because I notice you only do, you're only using vegetables. Can we just ferment with a ripe mango or jackfruit? What would happen then?
Yeah, so you kind of can and you cannot, meaning you can ferment fruits for a short period of time. Fermentation with fruit gets very different though, because you get all this alcohol production that happens. So, but you can ferment fruits, and you can do that in this same method. And then often that's blended into like a chutney. I haven't had the experience where I've had a fermented fruit that is super, super delicious in its raw form. I mean, its fermented form like this. But once it's then blended into some kind of a chutney with some nice spices in it, then it can be very tasty. But yeah, we're using vegetables because all fruits and vegetables will have enough native yeast on the skin to spontaneously or to ferment. So you never need to worry about how will the bacteria get there. It's just more about tastiness. All right, I think that should do it for us. A little bit more. So I can also use these kind of hardier leaves that I would not otherwise eat just raw. They're gonna still make a nice ferment. So I'll put these in too. This is where they get a little hard and fibrous. All right, so my veggies are in the jar. And they're nicely kind of packed in there, right? I have a little mint inside as well. And now I'm going to make the brine. So to do that, it's very ideal to have a kitchen scale because you're working with percentages. This in here is 1/2 liter of water. So if I'm making a brine, I can use anywhere between 2% to 5% salt. And I mean the weight of the water. This has nothing to do with my vegetable. This is the weight of my water. 2% is the lowest you can go. Well, I mean, you could go, if you're on a very low salt diet, try 1%. 5% is something, if you really like salt and you eat a fair amount of salt in your household, then go to 5%. Somewhere in the middle, you'll just find your own taste ground that you prefer. But yeah, 2 to 5% the weight of the water. For something like a cucumber that's very absorbative, you're going to want to go low, like 2 or 3%. Otherwise, it's going to be super, super salty. This fennel is pretty hardy, so I think we'll go with maybe a 3% brine. It's really up to you. It's totally cool, anywhere between 2 and 5. So 3% of my 1/2 liter here is going to be 15 grams. That means that I'm going to take some salt. So I've cleared off my scale. I'm putting some salt in until it's 15 grams. And then I'll just stir it up. You can use any kind of salt. Because you're fermenting and you're making things bioavailable, this is a nice opportunity to use a more quality salt, meaning like if you're buying Tata iodized salt to cook with, you could at least buy some nice salt just to ferment with. All right, guys, check out the ease of this. Here are my vegetables packed in my clean jar. Here's my 3% brine. I'm going to pour the brine over the vegetables until it gets to the top. And now I need something to weigh it down. I have conveniently kept this hardy chunk of the fennel. So that is going to go there to weigh it down. And before I put on a lid, I'm going to put a little butter paper under the lid because my lid is made out of metal and so it can easily corrode otherwise. So if I press this down, you can see that water is all the way up to the top here. This is my liquid seal. Then I would just put this over, put on my lid, and guys, congratulations. You have just made your first vegetable ferment. So this will now sit anywhere on my counter at room temperature for about 2 to 4 days. You can open it up, you can taste it, you can check it. It's very temperature dependent. So you want to, of course, be tasting and checking as you're going so that you can learn for yourself what is the process. So this is a brine ferment. Are you guys clear on what veggies you could do this with? That would be anything hardy and chunky. So beetroot, gobi, broccoli, zucchini. I wouldn't, for example, use a bottle gourd, like a loki or a dudi. I wouldn't use that for this. That's a very soft vegetable. In fact, I've made very delicious ferments. Yes, raw mango will work, says Shilpa. So yes, go ahead. I've made very delicious ferments using a loki or dudi. When you grate it, so that now transitions us to our conversation about dry salting. So if I wanted to use a dry salting method, for example, I have a loki that's about to go bad in my fridge. Loki, dudi, bottle gourd. So we're all on the same page. I could grate it using this hardy part, and then I could dry salt that because it'll lose all of its liquid, and then I can ferment that. So that is the process that we're going to see right now. And maybe while I'll just run through these other questions quickly. So what is the fermentation time cycle, and does it change vegetable to vegetable? In a brine method like this, your fermentation time is pretty much always going to be 2 days to 5 days. It's going to depend on your temperature. So I cannot tell you so specifically. You'll just have to taste and see. Other ferments that take longer are, it does depend vegetable to vegetable. For example, if I did this dry salting method for dudi, that's still only going to take like 4 or 5 days. It's a very soft vegetable. If I did a dry salting method for cabbage, which is what we're going to do today, cabbage is a pretty hardy vegetable, so that you can ferment longer. Now, just like making kombucha or kind of any fermentation, it is up to you and your taste buds to determine when you want to stop it. If you want it to be really sour and really mushy, then you just keep fermenting it for 2 months. It'll keep going. As long as mold hasn't come, you can keep fermenting. All of my ancestors in Europe back in the day stayed alive during the winters because they would ferment huge gluts of cabbage in big barrels, and it would ferment over 3-4 months. And then that would get eaten throughout the winter as a critical source of vitamin C. So it does change vegetable to vegetable, but you can basically count on 2 to 4 days for any kind of ferment like this. And only really things like sauerkraut or kimchi, you want to go for something like 2 weeks. All right. Pooja is asking, beetroot loses its color and looks pale. Is that okay, or I'm doing something wrong? Maybe you got some not great beetroot, because I feel like when I ferment beetroot, it looks amazing and super vibrant. So maybe just get new beetroot and try again. And now the next question is, how do you make sauerkraut? So let's now transition ourselves to talking about dry salty method. And we are in fact going to make sauerkraut. So that everyone knows what sauerkraut is a traditional ferment from Europe. This would be all of my ancestors' fermenting tradition. It looks like this, and it's fermented cabbage. Looks like this. It is super delicious, meaning it's sour and it's a little crunchy, but soft as well. And really tangy and has lots of umami. It's super delicious. You can eat it in a salad, you can eat it in a sandwich, or you can just eat it on the side of your plate, or even like with some rice or in a stir fry or something. So many options. So a dry salting method goes like this. I'm going to turn my camera down here again. Okay, I already have in this bowl, just as a little pre-planning, I just sliced some onions and also some shimla mirchi, some green capsicum. Sauerkraut's base is made of cabbage, but you can add in other vegetables as well. Now, this I've cut off my hardy top, and I'm going to save that for using on my ferment. And this I just want to give a wash to. I've taken off the outer leaves, but just give it a little rinse. And again, how I chop this really doesn't matter. Some people chop it very, very fine. Other people chop it chunky. I'm just going to take out that kind of hearty middle, but because it tends to get a little bitter. And then otherwise, I'm going to chop it up. So I'm not too particular about how it's chopped, and nor should you be. You should let kids even just Let kids get in here with a knife. Let them also have fun, because it doesn't matter if it's really fine or if it's really chunky. I mean, if you have a preference personally, then there you go, but it'll ferment fine either way. So I'm just gonna chop it all up. This goes also in my bowl. Okay, and that goes in my bowl. Now I can also decide to flavor it a little bit. So this is some fresh dill from the garden that is often very traditionally used in sauerkraut, and all of my ancestors would have done it, so I like to put it in. So I'll just chop up a little dill. And now, as a great example of what this workshop is all about, monsoons are coming, and so my garden is kind of going, going to the dogs. And so I have this zucchini that is not looking so great. The top had kind of rotted off. We're an organic farm after all. And so with this, I can also just chuck this in here. And I can do that in a great many ways. I could just grate it like this and put it in like that. I could make a ferment, a dry salting ferment just with a grated vegetable as well. Or I can kind of slice it finely. For a dry salting ferment, grating it is best. But for my time's sake, I'm gonna do this. So if I wanted to do a dry salt on carrots or beetroot or dudi or sponge gourd or any of those things, I would grate them using a grater and then put them in. Okay, so now I have a bowl of veggies, right? Some veggies and some herbs. Now, how do I add salt to this? I do this by the weight of the vegetable. I am going to actually weigh this and then find out what is 2% of this, and that's what I'm going to use as my salt. Okay, here we go. Scale on. I have this other bowl that I'll mix in. So I'll zero my scale out, and now in go all of the veggies. And total, this is 660 grams. So I will take a phone and I'll go, okay, 660 times 2%. So that's 13 grams of salt that I need. So just right here on my scale like this, I can add in 13 grams of salt.
Are you particular about the type of salt that you use?
It's best to use a good quality salt, meaning a natural salt. So a rock salt or a Himalayan salt, something like that. Now what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to massage this so that this releases the liquid. Because I still, always when I'm fermenting, I need this liquid on top. So I need to massage this until it's released as much liquid so that I can stuff it into a jar. There's no particular rhyme or reason to this either, just get in there.
While you're doing that, I'm going to share some questions in the group.
Sure.
On the chat. It's Shilpa asks, is pressed salad the same or different method?
Ooh, I'm sorry, Shilpa. I don't know what pressed salad is, so I can't answer that.
Shilpa, you're welcome to put on your microphone and ask. Rajiv, so Rajiv's asking, he's reframed the question a bit. I'm sorry, Rajiv, I invite you to ask the question yourself directly. You're talking about energy conversion is important in fermentation. Is energy conversion important in fermentation? Is that the question I'm understanding?
I mean, maybe I'm not scientific enough to understand your question. I mean, energy is happening. Gas is getting created. Carbon dioxide is getting created. So yes, it is important that it's alive and it's active, for sure. Does that answer your question? So you can see, guys, I'm still massaging, but and now I'm getting some liquid, but this is not enough. I have to keep going. I can even do this method, right? Because here at the Odd Gum Nut, we ferment so much sauerkraut because we sell sauerkraut. So we have these huge batches, and then you really have to punch it and get in there.
Celia, why don't you put on your mic and share your experience?
Who, me? Hi, Laura.
Hello.
So I make sauerkraut all the time. It's like a monthly ritual at home.
Awesome.
I have like a big jar. But the thing is, I've never measured anything. I was just telling Jacob on the side that I've been winging it all this while.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know if that really changes anything, but I've always liked the taste. I've never had an issue with it.
I mean, then, girlfriend, go for it.
Yeah.
I tell recipes because if I was just like, hey guys, just go for it.
Yeah.
Like, why did I come to class?
Yeah.
But yeah. You can, if it's working for you, great.
Yeah.
Generally 2% is the standard
right
for a ferment like this.
Yeah. And I usually add like turmeric, dill, pepper, and garlic. And the turmeric gives it a really nice color on like toasts and stuff.
That's amazing. And yeah, if you use generally green cabbage, but mix in a little bit of red cabbage, it also makes this fuchsia pink.
Yeah. So I've done it with, I've also grated beetroot and added it to yellow cabbage. And so the whole thing turns pink.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
So good. Everyone take inspiration from Divya on all the awesome things you can do. Okay, now, here. Yeah. So now I'm going to stuff this into a jar. This is a clean jar. It's nothing special. I didn't sanitize it. It's just a normal clean jar. And my vegetable, as you can see here, if I lift it, is now dripping wet. So I'm just going to put it in my jar. And it's good to have some other kind of bowl underneath you while you're doing this to catch your remnants. And as I'm putting it in here, I want to be packing it in.
Why? Why is packing it in important?
Packing it in is going to ensure that when it starts to get bubbly and produce gas later, it makes it so that it's, it's just like, it's totally compacts it. So you get a lot of material in, but you also make sure that your liquid is completely covered. Because if this was loose, if it's not packed, I'm not going to have liquid raised to the top. Like right now, you can't see liquid at the top. But if I really press it all in and pack it in, then, as you'll see right now, you can see that I have liquid coming up.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah. So, instead of massaging it for so long, if we just leave the salt and the vegetables, automatically the water will come out, right?
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So, I mean, do we have to really massage it that well, or should we just leave it with salt and let the water come out on its own?
I would say that you should try that. And then you should see if enough liquid comes. And if not, then maybe you only need to massage it for a little bit of time.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Because yes, theoretically, that should be fine. The point is to get the liquid.
Right.
The point is not a forearm workout.
Great. Thank you.
So now I've got, it's a little messy here. I'll clean it up in a bit later. But so now I've got all my veggies and my liquid up at the top. You guys can all see that. But my goal is that I have none of these veggies touching the air, right? So I'm going to take my chunk here and I'm going to make it just a little bit less chunky. So something like this, and I'll sink this in here. Cut this to the right size. Give it a little rinse in water so that it's clean. And then I'll sink that in there. Now, what will happen is that you'll see when I press this down, I have my liquid all the way up to the top, but generally all my veggies are down at the bottom. So now I want to do the same thing, get some butter paper and a lid. And the lid, of course, then will keep that press intact. And this is just going to protect my lid from rusting. So I'll put that on, go there, squeeze it down. And this can now sit and ferment for the next about 2 weeks. So this is now a dry salting method. All right, guys, you've now made your second ferment. So let me just rinse my hands and then we can take some Q&A.
Great, thank you. So we're going to quickly wrap this up because we are stepping over time now. We had some questions, and Laura, please feel free to direct them to your course, which we are fans of.
Great.
Also, yeah, while we are at it, we are giving out three accounts as prizes to people who have been very active on this chat. So we'll contact you later to give you access to the course that Laura has designed. Laura, why don't you tell people what it is? Because I think your course will address a lot of these questions.
Totally. So yeah, guys, we at the Odd Gum Nut, we really want to be here as a source for you to know that there are so many other options out there on how to live a sustainable life. And that actually it's really easy. And when we start doing these things, they save us money, they incite our creativity, they make our bodies and our households and our ecosystems healthier. So we have an online course that's called the Odd Gum Nut's Guide to Radical Self-Reliance. You have lifetime access to it on Udemy, and it's only 1,600 rupees, and it's like 9 hours of content. Everything across gardening, fermenting all kinds of food, meaning making like sourdough bread and kombucha and sodas, etc. And gardening, I said gardening, but then even community related things like how to make a gray water system, how to make a composting toilet, how to clean water and route it back to your garden, how to make all the soap you need, how to make shampoo and conditioner and deodorant and toothpaste, et cetera, et cetera. Basically just how to equip yourselves so you don't have to be a consumer. You can be an active producer in your life and in your household. And then a whole range of fermented things. So all of that link is there. It's that bit.ly link. And you should check it out. One-time buy, lifetime access. And I feel super passionate about it. I love the information on there. I think it really equips you to go do what you want to do. And yeah, we are right at 5 p.m. now. So let me just see if there are a couple of fast questions I can get to. One question on vegan coconut kefir. So kefir, actually I brought one out thinking that I could show you. Kefir is a fermented milk product. You can very barely, this one hasn't split so much yet. You can kind of see it in there though. And you take little grains, little living culture grains, and those ferment milk. You can do the same thing with coconut milk. It's the exact same process as using dairy milk. You just put the coconut milk in, leave it on the grains for 24 hours, strain it out, and you'll get a cultured milk, in whatever form that is. And otherwise, I think all these questions have been, oh, Chiku asks, can you use fermented vegetables to add flavors to our beverages? That is a great and experimental question. And I would encourage you to go try that out. It's not one I've done. Fruits lend themselves very well to our fermented beverages. I can imagine maybe if you made a fermented hot sauce, you could put that in a beverage. But once you start eating fermented vegetables, you'll realize that their taste is pretty distinct. And frankly, I wouldn't want that taste also in a soda that I'm drinking. And let me see if there's any last couple quick questions. Yeah, so Pooja asks, if people find my ferments too sour, should I ferment it less? Spot on. The longer you ferment, the more sour it will get because the more lactic acid bacteria will come to the party. So you can even just ferment it for 1 day, 2 days, and then serve that and see if people react better to that kind of ferment. From Galaxy M10, the question is, what's the difference between Greek yogurt and normal yogurt? The only difference is that it's been hung. It's a hung curd. So some of the liquid has escaped out and you've just reserved the curd. That's the only difference.
Okay, we have loads of questions. I'm going to have to jump in there.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. But yes, I have to jump in there and stop there because we are over time. Okay. And I'm also pushing you to go sign up for Laura's course. We're also giving out 3 of these courses as a prize sponsored by Jhaka.org. If you want to do that, if you would like to be eligible for that prize, we're going to be sharing a learning assessment form Didi, requesting you to share the learning assessment form. So just take 30 seconds to fill up that form. It just asks you a rating of what is your knowledge before the session, what's your knowledge after the session. It helps us become better and give you more courses like this. And if you are interested in that last field, you can say you are interested in the course, and we will be giving it out to 3 people who have participated in this course and who have expressed interest in the form. Yes, so we're giving out 3 courses for free. The rest of you will going to have to go and sign up yourselves. Do it. I've done it. I'm going to show off my own learnings from Laura's courses. Here's my mango and chili ferment. This is my ginger bug. Here's my soap nut brew. And for one last time, I'm going to show you bioenzymes. There we go. So go do this. Go learn how to be radically self-reliant, to be a producer, to be of smaller impact, and not be a consumer. And you can even run your own business very much like Laura does. So is there anything else? Didi, can you share the learning assessment? There we go. Please take a minute to fill up that form. Didi has just shared it. And I request you to switch on your cameras. We can take a screenshot of all of us as a group. And I request you to switch on your cameras. By switching on your cameras, you're giving us consent to share the image online. Can I ask you to please switch on your camera so we can do it together?
Oh, hello, everyone. Anshul, it's nice to see you. Anshul's been in several of my classes. Awesome.
Yes. Big fan.
There we go. We have some alumni. Hi, Anshul, fellow alumni. There we go. All right. We have 7 people who have filled that form. Going to wait for 2 more. Please fill up that form. And we're going to take a quick photograph together. Smile, everybody.
Yay.
3, 2, say kimchi. Kimchi.
Kimchi.
One more, and there you go. Thank you. All right. No worries, Radhika. Thank you for participating. Thanks to everyone that's filled up the form. Please do share anything you can about this online to spread the word about this kind of lifestyle. Thank you for being here. We're going to disconnect the live.
And I'll also, Jacob, email this PDF to you. I tried to attach it in here, but it's not looking like it's happening. So I'll email it to you, and then anyone who signed up, you can send it out that way. That sounds good.
That would be great. Thank you. We will be sending out a follow-up mail with a link to a blog post, Laura's PDF, and the course, and all the links that have been shared here will also be shared in a blog post, which will be linked in an email to everyone that signed up here. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. And you find us on Webinar Wednesdays every alternate Wednesday right here. So follow our pages at Jhatka.org and at The Odd Gum Nut. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, guys. Happy fermenting.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. End the call. Thank you.